Hello, everybody. Welcome with me today. I have Lewis. I'm excited to have Lewis here, and we're going to talk about actually quite a wide range of different things that Lewis was able to ship in NVim 08, or that he was able to work on with other people. So I'm excited for that. Lewis, why don't you give us a little introduction, a little bit about yourself, and we can just get started talking about all these cool features.
Excellent. Okay, yeah. So my name's Lewis. I'm a neovim core developer. I became a core developer basically for this development cycle. So I'm quite happy about that.
Yeah.
But before that, I've been, for the last development cycle, I did a whole heap of changes. That's basically how I earned the badge to get promoted. And then even before that, I was doing quite a lot of stuff. I've got a few plugins around that quite a few people use. Biggest one being Git signs. So if you use Git projects with neovim and you like to see what your changes are and work on your changes and stuff like that, then that's a pretty good plugin to use. And then also impatient.nvim, which basically is just a cache for Lua, so it's able to load it a lot quicker. Because
I use both of those.
Yeah,
so
yeah, that's actually a really good one. Just because it just really works, and it's quite a simple plugin.
It's just free.
Yeah, it's free.
It's not like spending hours and hours and hours making your startup time faster. You just like do one thing and then it's just faster. That's the kind of improvements to startup time that I'm okay doing for my workflow. Yeah.
Yeah. So so that's me, I guess. So this, I guess, development cycle, I've done quite a wide range of changes, but also kind of involved in the reviews of everything with everyone. It's been really fun this cycle actually, and there's been a lot of discussions, just like going out further out into the future, as well as like a lot of heat discussions about how we should take things further, and also just pulling our hair out trying to understand what is going on in some parts of him. Honestly, I still don't understand. I thought I understand really well. Like, for example, like window options. I'm convinced no one understands what window options do and how they work.
It is currently clear to me that everyone has a different interpretation of how window options work, and simultaneously they're right, which is the confusing thing about how it works. It just feels indeterministic, except deterministically indeterministic. And I remember smashing my face against the keyboard quite a bit doing the first iteration of vim.opt, which we'll probably get into a little bit as well for this, and just like, I don't know what window options are supposed to do. What does it mean to say set window option equals some value? Nobody knows.
Like, I've studied like the implementation enough, and like it looks fine, and then you just like you grab and then you find some other part of the code base that's doing something else, and then so yeah. So there's that. So yeah.
Yeah, so we'll get it. Why don't we just start with that, since we're already talking about options? Little bit of background. I did vim.opt a while ago because we were looking to figure out how can we do some fun stuff with being able to like append to options and remove from options and interact with options, Vim options, right, in a little bit more ergonomic way inside of Lua, because it was pretty annoying to do like string concats with all this stuff, and sometimes the string concats would fail, and there are all these edge cases, and you don't know what type each option is, and some options need special handle. You're aware. Chat may not be aware, but you'll run into it if you're doing various different configurations, right? So we made this first pass of vim.opt, and then that led to some of the stuff that you've been doing. So why don't you give us a little overview of what happened with vim.opt and maybe some future plans or ideas that we've been bouncing around.
So basically, G Pandas, Greg, he came up with he added NVim set option value to the API, which is basically an improved version of what we had before, which was what NVim buff set option, get option, and then win get option. So it was basically a replacement for all them, as a way to basically future proof being able to do anything with options, and that's been pretty successful. And that going forward, the plan is that is like the de facto way of using the API to work with options. And from that, with the introduction of that's allowed us to kind of simplify some of the Lua specific accesses that we have. So vim.o, the opt, and stuff like that. So as I got involved in that, I've kind of tried to get my head around how can we make, how can we take what we've got now and kind of make it better, because we've got a bit of a competing situation now, because we've still got all the vim.o,
Right.
vim.bo, vim.wm, but then we've got opt and opt local, and they kind of got their strengths and weaknesses, and I really want to have one to some
Right.
degree.
Yes, we would like to only have one way, but there's some difficulties as we've discussed a lot
Yeah.
online, just about managing both like how plugins currently work, and like not wanting to break everybody's plugins everywhere, but also it's not obvious necessarily how to make some of these things work that had a very concise, if difficult, syntax that works in VimScript, right? So there's this, we'll say, nice DSL, right, that existed inside of VimScript to work with these options and do some stuff with them. But Lua is a simple language, and so it only has so many affordabilities, for you to make things. So we are at a bit of an impasse for some of these, or maybe not an impasse. We're just still thinking, which is fun.
Yeah.
We're thinking, we're API designing, we're trying to figure out what could be awesome. How can we like make it a joy to do this thing?
Exactly. So,
Mm-hmm.
and another thing about options is the thing that bothers me the most, and this is one of the things I hit doing some of the other features I hit. It was the pseudo string thing you're talking about, where basically we have a ton of options which are just like these strings that contain loads of information, and they're really hard to like modify and edit. And I refer to them as pseudo strings, but they're really, in essence, like what they really need to be is like a table or a dictionary or a set, and that's what vim.opt solves, right? But you kind of do it at the abstraction level, as opposed to what I would like, what we plan to do. Me and Fabino have been talking about this, is doing it in core, basically. So the options themselves are actually tables and dicts, and when you do it for VimScript, it's actually just converting a pseudo string into a dictionary, not the other way around.
Right. Which would be awesome, and I think like make a lot of code inside of core more sensible, and I think allows us to have further improvements of things as we go to sort of like make options act the way that you think they would, right? Like you just pass a list and it's a list, and you're like, that's cool. Well, what if I wanted to store more than just strings? Oh yeah, we can do that. Like we could possibly do those things. Maybe not in VimScript, but that's okay. We could do it through get option value and set option value and have some ways to do that, which I think is exciting. It is a much larger and more difficult change than writing the abstraction on top, but the abstraction on top does, I think, give us like ways to play, right, and to sort of explore to see what we actually want the underlying one to do. So I'm looking forward to that work, and just to see the solutions that you come up with will be fun.
Yeah, and I think one of the other benefits that will bring us is it will allow us to kind of scale adding options a bit better. Because at the moment, if you want to add like a Boolean flag, you've either got to pack it into one of these pseudo strings, which is just getting worse and worse, or you make a separate option for it. So if these options were, it kind of introduces categories in a way. So you've got like diff ops, format ops, stuff like that. If that was like a layer into an extra table that you can set, it just, I think, going far forward into the future would just make things a lot more scalable.
Right, like so instead of having to remember what like one character things are in a 30 option list for format opts, you could just say like comment new line equals false or something like that, instead of remembering that happens to be the single char C.
Yeah, exactly.
Or something like that. Yep. Those I think are all really exciting improvements. So okay, so I rambled a little bit here, but that's okay. I think we've got NVim set option, NVim set option value, and get option value. So we've done some refactors in vim.opt, and then that's kind of like some of where we're shooting in the future for that. Anything else that you want to mention relating to options as of today? Or does that cover everything you're thinking?
I think that covers everything. It's so hard and there's so much to it. It's such an integral part to the editor.
Right.
And really, the refactoring I did on vim.opt was really just me trying to look at what's there and understand it. So that's really what this release was for me in a lot of senses, just looking at stuff and trying to put it in my head.
Yeah, and us chatting a lot in different chat rooms, trying to work towards how can we make a unified uh, one that doesn't appear too magical, right? But also is actually kind of easy to write and doesn't take like 100 characters to set an option to true. That doesn't really feel like the right like level of abstraction for something so core to like your everyday workflow inside of like configuring neovim.
Exactly.
Yep. Awesome. So what else was interesting this release for you besides options work?
So probably the next thing was we added spell checking support to tree sitter enabled buffers.
Yeah.
So this has been like a long standing thing I've wanted for a long time, so much so that I actually made a separate plugin to get it working, because I just couldn't like, when I first used tree sitter, I was like, oh my god, this is really good. And then I just noticed I was red squiggly lines all over my buffer. I was like, okay, this is a deal. I can't do this.
Right.
So I just had to like, I think to begin with, I just enabled the legacy syntax lighting layer on top, which was like a hack that we did to begin with to get around that.
Yep.
And then I was just like, stuff this. I'm just gonna somehow get this to work. And I was able to make a plugin that kind of got the built-in spell checker to work, and then that was good enough. That was functionally good. So that functionality, not necessarily implementation, is completely different now, but that functionality is now in core, and we've kind of tightly integrated the tree set. We've added basically new APIs to the decoration stuff to basically enable spell checking in tree set buffers, which is really good.
Yeah, so we should define a few of those things. So the first thing would be like, what do you mean for the decorations APIs?
Oh, right. So there's a few of them, right? So I guess the main one, or let's say there's two. So there's the decoration provider, which is done with NVim decoration provider, and that basically just allows you to hook into the redraw logic, and whenever Vim's drawing anything, you can just you can basically set these things called X marks, which are basically a neovim's way of just defining ranges in the buffer that says, I want this thing to look like this and I want this thing to look like this. And we basically just, anything that can do anything visual, we just define an X mark for it. So we have an X mark for highlights, virtual text, virtual lines, signs, whatever.
Right. And all of those are like provided basically just by calling API functions from Lua callbacks. So it's super cool because it's extensible, not just like in core, but then you can register your own ones and add them.
Yeah.
Right. So that's the first part of decoration provider. And then what was the second part of the API that you wanted to mention?
Well, it was the X marks. I had X mark, right? So sorry.
Okay.
So
nice. That's good.
You can do X marks without a decoration provider, right?
Right.
So
yep.
So the spell checker was basically done just by adding another one of them, running a spell checker query, and just adding an X marks. We've now just kind of moved that into the main tree sitter highlighter in a way, but it all works. It's good. We've added most of the support to most of the languages in NVim tree sitter, so you should just be able to use that, set spell, and go.
Yeah, and so to be clear, the cool and like interesting bit about this as well is what you're saying with those spell queries. What is a spell query? Not everybody knows what's going on.
What's a query?
Yeah,
so,
doesn't have to be too specific. Just overview is fine.
So I guess for anyone that's familiar with legacy syntax highlighting that was done with this kind of DSL.
There's like 5 people out there probably.
That's probably, yeah. But basically it was just a load of way of defining regexes, and then when you hit that regex, what other regexes can be contained within this regex, and what highlight groups do we want to apply on top of that. A query is basically the tree sitter version of that. Is basically saying what pattern of AST do we want to look for, and then when we find that pattern of AST, define it into this identifier, and then somewhere off in the Lua code we go, oh, look for these identifiers in the AST and look what regions there are, and then we apply these highlights onto them. So you can do these.
Yeah, so I imagine like for a lot of the spell sitter queries, they at least include comment.
Yeah, that's like so. When I did the plugin I made for spell checking, I literally just if they didn't have a query, I just did comment, and that was like a very good
Yeah,
fallback for like 80% of all cases. We've not done it this time,
right.
so yeah, if you want to spell support, you need to make sure that's in there. But I've gone through and done it for 90% of languages that we're currently supporting.
Yeah.
So yeah, for at least comment.
Are there any interesting ones that aren't comment like that come to mind off the top of your head?
Yeah, so I did it for Python doc strings, but not Python
Oh.
strings.
Mm-hmm.
uh,
That's really cool. Yeah, so when you triple quote something at the like top of a function, that's a doc
yeah,
string. That's really cool. That is a fun idea. I like that.
yeah, because I know there's a bit of a divide between whether people want spell checking in strings or not. I'm I'm in
Right.
the camp that doesn't want it, but I think the majority do want it. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to tell. I think we'll probably have to make that configurable at some point, but at least in Python, there should be no contention there. I would hope.
Well, it is already configurable. You just put a different query
Yeah, yeah,
for your spelling, right? So like that's the other really nice, I think an interesting part about it, right? Is like after you learn the basics of writing some of these queries, it's pretty easy to start extending or completely replacing your own. There was some cool stuff also merged about how do we manage queries at runtime, which is nice, and maybe I'll show in the demo afterwards. But I think that's the really cool part about this, right? Is like you can get complicated matching scenarios and not just be like, oh, any line that starts with this, like we're gonna syntax highlight. Well, that's not gonna cover all. Like
mm,
that's kind of an annoying way to try and figure out if something's actually a comment or not, right? Or things like that. So that's really cool. And so now you do that, and then it from the end user perspective feels magically determines that it needs to do spell checking in those regions. Is that basically that's the right way to think about what's going on,
yeah.
right?
Pretty much. So the decoration provider is just basically as it's going through, it goes. Oh, I've got a spell. I got a match that is a spell match on this region.
Mm-hmm.
Set an X mark with spelling to true, and then in core it just goes, oh, this region needs spell checking. Oh, spell checking on it. So
Sweet. Yeah, and that is now just no longer a plugin. It's a neovim feature, which is really exciting and cool. And another example I think of people iterating and exploring lots of different ideas outside of core, and then we sort of pick those ideas. In this case, you know got to pick your own idea, which is good and nice. But iterating those on outside of core and coming to a really, I think, elegant solution, which is sometimes people want us to just put something in core right away, and you're like, well, we probably wouldn't have come to such a good endpoint if we had not like tried for a while outside of core. So I think it's a really great example of that kind of thing happening inside of
yeah,
neovim.
and looking kind of forward to the future, Vigu wants to now just rip out the built-in spell checker and replace it with a standard one, which sounds like a good idea.
Yeah.
So that's kind of ongoing. Hopefully, we'll find something that works. But
Yeah.
it actually turns out the Vim Bram spell checker is actually pretty good for English. So we're at a situation where we go, oh, do we choose this external spell checker which is good for everything but English, or do we use this spell checker that is only good for English?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But that's kind of ongoing. Hopefully, that something progresses there.
Cool. I think the next interesting thing to talk about is related to NVim command. We've already chatted with Vimeo sort of about some of what is NVim command. If you haven't watched that video when this is uploaded later, I'll have a link in the description for that. Of course, you can't have a YouTube video without saying link in the description, obviously. Um, but Liz, what parts did you sort of play in the iterations after that, and maybe some of the exciting things that are now available in NVim 08?
Right, so I guess the first thing was basically just to provide a nice kind of ergonomic binding to NVim command in Lua. So basically, before the general convention before is if you ever wanted to write Vim scripts in Lua, you just did vim.commands and then maybe what was it, double square bracket, and then a bunch of Vim script code, or you might just do it in single quotes or whatever. But that was just like your get out card for running Vim script. So we've made that a little bit better now, and now you can actually just kind of index into vim.command with the dot operator, and basically call any X command you want. So if you want to say do something like, I don't know what's good, like write the buffer, you can do vim.command.write parentheses.
And then parentheses,
Yeah, that's
right?
it.
It looks just like a regular function.
Exactly. And that's weird, and that should work with any X command. And then you can there's also ways of passing all the different attributes and arguments that X commands have in all the different ways they do. Things like, range and address space, I don't know, all sorts of weird stuff.
Right.
So that's pretty good. Once I did that, Reddit was quick on it, saying, "Oh, we've got this new thing now," and then I was saying, "Oh yeah, in theory, it should be a lot quicker because it's using NVim command, which is a structural form, and it's not having to parse these strings and stuff like that." And then someone came back and was like, "Oh no, it's actually twice as slow." I was like, "What?"
The worst thing you can hear.
No, I was like, "This is not how it should be." So I looked at the implementation and there's just I just kind of worked on it a bit, and I was able to clean up a few places where we was kind of over allocating in places that we didn't need to. So I was able to get the performance down that one a little bit. It's still a little bit slower, so it's probably like 30% slower now as opposed to 2 to 3 times. But the reason for that is just because of the way X commands are. And going forward in the future, we've got plans to basically rework things so the string building of the commands is no longer necessary, and we can just pass in the structural components as they are. So that should make things. So that in theory should make it a lot quicker.
It also will make, I think, like a lot of the internal implementations sort of like in that next layer, like a lot easier to read. One of the things that I had like so much annoyance with when I was doing the auto command refactor, which suffers from some of the same problem as his general X commands, is just like, oh, we're just going to pass around this struct that could be like basically anything, or like sometimes we just pass around the string and we're like parsing it as we go, and then we like sometimes do this or that, and you're like, I don't know what's gonna happen. Like, where are we going? And so like you can imagine moving from that to this like structured form where we have like, oh, here's the X command, like which one it is, and here's the structured arguments, and you just like call a function and you pass those in directly. Like, it's not only I think that it'll be faster, which I feel confident, like you're saying that it would be, but like also it'll just be like so much easier to read because you just do like, oh, if args.range, and you're like, oh, nice, like that's convenient to read. I can understand what's happening, which is really, I think, really nice for just in terms of maintainability and doing all this other stuff.
Yeah, so I think the main reason that's the situation it is now is just because the code is so old. Because you'll have some X commands that literally just look at the command line string and just work off that as it goes.
And they just have a pointer that moves across the string, and they're just like doing stuff as you go.
And that's where we get all the performance loss, because we have to rebuild this string. So that's that extra allocation. That's where it's all going, pretty much. But then we have a whole bunch of X commands that don't use it whatsoever. And they will all just do what you said. They'll just go, look at the range, look at this structure field, and then it's all fine. So for those commands, we don't really even have to refactor them. We just have to not build the string command before it goes in.
Right, just skip the middle section where we build it and then unbuild it. You're like, oh yeah, maybe that could be faster if we just didn't do that.
Exactly. So as well as that, I'm just trying to refactor it, make sense of it. There's loads of edge case stuff going around that code, as you can imagine. So this whole area.
Yeah, and I'll just say one other thing that I think is cool is like as we go further and some of these X commands and maybe even new X commands, because they won't be only exclusively called through basically like passing something on the command line, it's possible that we could pass, at least I think, and from my understanding, we can pass other data types. So you could just like pass a Lua function ref like directly or something like that to some of these as we sort of like work further and think about how to do this. We might be able to do something interesting from NVim command, like you pass a number instead of a string that happens to be hopefully a number. These kind of things allow us to maybe do some exciting options going forward that I think could could be interesting on the Lua side. You wouldn't be able to like type those. There's no way to type a Lua function.
Yeah, exactly.
Like by hand, but we now have parameterized this and explored this option, and we can maybe do even like things that were just not even thinkable to do before.
Yes, definitely. I didn't actually even think about what you just said, like passing multiple types into.
Oh, nice. Sweet. So I just motivated you to think of something cool. You're like, oh, nice. Yeah, we should do that.
Yeah.
Cool. I'm all about, I don't really care about typing that much. I'm just going to write a key map anyways to skip the typing, So like, I'm ready to like pass functions directly into X commands, Everything should just be Lua functions. That's my life these days, I think. So
definitely.
Cool. And then is there anything else that you'd like to mention about the release?
So this release really, I think as I've said already, for me, it's been very much just trying to tidy things up, get to understand things, make things cleaner, make things easier. And it's really, whilst all this has been ongoing, it's really stuff for the next release that I'm actually more excited about. A lot of stuff that just didn't get to make it to this release. So I guess the thing that's at the top of my list for the next release is we've got an improved diff for the next release. I don't know if you've seen this. So
is the PR that's been around for a while?
That one.
I have seen this. There's like a million awesome like graphs and like all this stuff. I remember reading through like this person's genius. I don't know what's happening, but like it looks awesome.
Yeah, so it's a PR from a first time contributor that basically I don't know how to describe it. So basically, if you understand how a diff works, it's basically just trying to look for regions in code where it differs, and it's just regions really. It's just like this block of code, this block of code, and it doesn't care how those regions relate at all. So what this PR does is basically compare those regions and does kind of like a second stage diff, and then tries to match each individual line, because you might have within a region 2 lines that are actually the same. So then it ends up splitting it up and just makes it way more refined and kind of more and less noisy at the same time, depending on what the diff is. But overall, a lot more powerful, because it allows things like much better word diffing and stuff like that. It's also very CPU intensive. It's very exciting. I think the change is probably close to being mergeable, but we wanted just a whole cycle just to kind of work out some issues, because there's a lot of kind of it's quite slow basically at the moment, and we think we can make it a lot faster by just removing a lot of allocations. I kindly asked the author of the PR to add a Lua binding, and he did, and then I was like, okay, I'm happy. There
you go. Get signs is like, I know, and like diffview NVim, like plus like all these Git related plugins are going to be very happy.
Exactly. So I actually tried it with Git signs, and it just worked, which I was so surprised. Cool. I think I just had to turn on the option, and then it just worked. I was like, oh my god, this is crazy.
Yeah. Oh, that is great. Yeah.
So that's the biggest thing on my list. And then other than that, like I said, I'm still gonna be focusing on refactoring. I'm looking at trying to do more perf gains in places. I've got a PR right now that basically does about a 30% perf increase on NVim get text. From Lua, not RPC. So basically the goal is to basically specialize some of the API functions to be more optimal for different backends. Because at the moment they basically allocate in the middle, and then it goes off to the backend. So RPC will send its data out via message pack or via the Lua API, but the Lua API is already doing a bunch of stuff anyway, so we don't have to do that in the middle. Right. So that should be a pretty good one. But yeah, other than that, and another good thing I'm excited about is LSP semantic highlighting.
Oh yeah. So
there's already a PR for that that the house has raised, but he's also raised that PR, created that PR as a plugin that you can just install, and it works really well. So I think that's in a pretty close state to being merged.
Sweet. Yeah, for those who don't know, like obviously TreeSitter provides highlighting, but sometimes there's some additional information that TreeSitter can't know. It doesn't have a compiler. It doesn't actually know the types of things. And so we sometimes do things like, if something's like all caps, we assume that it's a constant. right? Like that might be how you highlight from tree sitter. But LSP can actually just tell you that thing is a constant, like you declared it as a constant, so highlight it as a constant, which is pretty sweet and like nice to get that next layer of highlighting information.
I found it super useful whilst working on the NVim code base, like because you can just see, oh, this is a macro. This isn't like, especially when you're in like, for example, when you're in like a function that's 3,000 lines long, which do exist.
Many. That's fun.
Yeah, you can see like if a specific identifier is a function argument or not. Really, because I got it set up so it's like function arguments are in italics, so I can quickly see. Oh, that's a function argument. And there's all sorts of stuff you can do that the LSPs will provide, a lot of the standard LSPs provide all this stuff already. It's just a case of our client using that information.
Right. And deciding what that should look like in terms of configuring and all this other stuff, right? Like, as is the case, I think for NeoVim, sometimes things are a little bit more complicated in core because we want to make it so that it feels like you own parts of the LSP implementation as like a user, right? As opposed to just like, I just like we want it to just work, right? But we want you to be able to like customize it, right? That's like LSP handlers and like all this other stuff. So there's complications in finding where that right interface boundary lines up, which I think has been a lot of sort of the back and forth on the semantic highlighting PR from what I've seen as I check in occasionally.
Yeah. I think there's one. I think the only issue I'm aware of is how it's supposed to work with multiple LSPs, which is a fair point.
That is also always a complicated a complicated thing for a lot of these different options.
So other than that, that's kind of my take on everything this release.
Sweet. Yeah, we're excited. We'll have to have you back, it sounds like, for next release to give us the results of some of these exciting projects. So anyway, I want to thank you, Lewis, for your time today, and thanks for coming out. And I'm sure chat is very excited for a lot of things you mentioned and looking forward to the things coming up. So thanks.
Thanks a lot for having me.